this story, they'll be waiting, yeah, for the haters.
All right. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to For The Hayters podcast. Today we have a special guest, but before we introduce him, for those of you new here, my name is Becky. I am the host. And then we also have Laura, who's our co-founder and writer. Laura?
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone. And we have a special guest today, Josh.
What's up, everyone?
We're really excited to have you here. And
Thank you.
I'm really excited to jump into the conversation. So if you could kind of just tell us a little bit about yourself, current self.
Okay.
I would
my
like
current
to say
self.
your current self, what you do.
Okay. My name is Josh Axe. I currently live in Pennsylvania, northeastern PA, represent. We're hailing out of Kingston right now, which is an awesome little town. And currently I'm a real estate investor, so it's my full-time gig. I have a flipping business where we flip houses. Past 18 months, we've probably done about 30. And we also have a rental business that we use the profits from the flips to buy rentals, and we have about 52 rental units. So pretty big portfolio.
And you came from just, real estate in general before that?
So before that, I was a real estate agent, and I had lived in Phoenix, and that's where I got my real estate license. I started in property management, and I really saw the value of, my job as working for the property management company was working with investors to sign up for our services. So I realized that these guys were collecting rent. The managers were managing the property, and they were just getting paid. I'm like, that's brilliant. And they would tell me what the numbers were because I would have to tell them what it would rent for. Mm-hmm. So they'd say, oh, well, what's this going to rent for? My mortgage and taxes and insurance are $600. I'm like, well, you're going to make $1,200 a month in rent. They're like, great. So I make $600 after fees and stuff. And I'm just like, geez, if I had 10 rentals,
yeah,
I can make $6,000 a month. How the heck do I do that?
Yeah.
Right. So then that's when the wheels started turning towards real estate investing as opposed to being an agent. So I did really well with that company and was signing up a ton of owners. And they changed their commission structure to where it wasn't as beneficial for me. So I started looking around, and my wife's cousin was working for a different management company. So, I started that conversation, and the owner of that company said, oh, well, if you do as well as you do there, we'll pay you $10,000 a month. I'm like, oh, great. Let's do it. So moved to that company, and they weren't doing the same type of advertising. They weren't doing, they weren't running the same type of business. So the success wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, which, life lesson there. Mm-hmm. So one day the property manager comes walking down the hall, and he's like, hey, do you know how to sell a house? I'm like, yep. And I had never sold a house before, right? I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Just say something with conviction and
yeah,
it's believed, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So anyways, he's like, all right, cool. This owner wants to sell. Give him a call. So I give this guy a call, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but end up getting the listing. I figure it out. I mean, you can learn anything online, mm-hmm. including how to sell a house. So I figure it out, get the paperwork signed, have the broker review it. He says it looks good. So I don't know. Sure. So I end up selling it, and I made like $4 or $5 just like that. And I'm like, this is incredible. How do I do that 20 more times, 100 more times, whatever? Mm-hmm. So, started selling a lot of houses in Phoenix, moved to northeastern PA, where, Phoenix, your median home price is $200,000, right? So 6% of that, you get 3%, whatever. So you make $6,000. Well, here, the median house price in Kingston, for example, is $100,000. So you immediately make half as much money, based on the number of home sales that you can do. But also, I came into it in this market where I was thinking, this is going to be so easy, because when we moved, no one would return my phone calls. And I'm like, I am a communication expert. Like, I got this figured out. Yeah. But the way that real estate brokerages are structured here is completely different, where they get a large portion of your commission when you sell a property. So they would eat up a lot of that money. So, I tell people, when you're selling a $50,000 house, you only get 3% of that, right? So $1,500, and then you give your broker 30%, you're taking home $1,050. Then you have self-employment tax, you have health insurance, you have all this stuff. I'm like, man, I'm not making any money. I can't do that, you know, because Lauren was going to school. So started looking again at real estate investing. And at the time I had met my business partner, who's one of our really good friends, and his wife went to school with Lauren. So we went for dinner, and a couple months later we started a company together. Didn't really know what we were going to do with it, but figured, okay, we'll do real estate investing to some capacity. And we ended up finding this rental property that was a 35-unit complex. So we're like, oh, I'll send him a letter, you know, like see if he wants to sell. So we did, and he responded. This guy lived in Mexico, right? So we're like, that's cool. You know, he's just collecting rent, whatever. But then we started like diving into the books, and there was a lot of issues with their management, right? And I had a history of property management, so I saw all of these errors, and my business partner did as well. So, you know, we're going through negotiation. We're seeing that his tenants are paying cash. They're paying literally every week. So it was just so mismanaged that we're like, okay, this could be a really great opportunity. So as we continue to go through it, we got really creative during the negotiations because we knew that the building likely wouldn't appraise for what we were under contract for, which was like 1.3 million or 135, something around there. So we're going through this with him, and we say, well, we'll buy the building, but we're afraid it's not going to appraise. So can you do seller financing, which is where the seller essentially becomes the bank for us. So we don't have to come out of pocket with any money, but we can still buy the building, which eliminates the need for an appraisal, right? So we structured a way. He was taking home about $6,000 per month. We knew that. And he lived in Mexico, so he didn't deal with any of the management. He had a property manager, blah, blah, blah. So we figured out a way for him to get paid like, it was actually like $7,000 a month through him carrying the mortgage. So he became the bank for us. So ended up getting this deal, and it was phenomenal, right? So we increased the rents. We, you know, started billing back some of the utilities. We started renovating all the units, putting all the cash flow that we were getting from the building back into rehabbing it. So we did all this stuff, and it's actually really cool how the value of commercial real estate is calculated, because it's based on the net operating income. So however much money after your taxes, insurance, everything, whatever is left, that's your net operating income. And there's a multiplying effect. So in Kingston, it was a 8 cap, right? So an 8% cap market. That's how they factor what the prices of buildings are going for, because that's the trading rate, right? So for example, we made a phone call the day that we bought that building, and we cut the insurance from $16,000 per year to $8,000 per year. So our NOI increased $8,000. Well, since it's an 8 cap, that increased the value of the building $100,000 in a 5-minute phone call. So that's what's really cool, right? So everything that you do in that type of real estate increases the value significantly. So
That's crazy.
In the wrong line of work.
yeah, so it's really cool. And, you know, I only know this because, like, literally I spent years, and Lauren, my wife, can attest to this. Every single day I was listening to podcasts about real estate. Every single day I was reading books about real estate. Like, it consumed me because I knew that, man, there's so much potential in this. So I dived in, and, you know, the rest is history. So sorry, that's a long answer for the quick version of who I am now.
It's funny because I was listening to a podcast, and real estate has always been something that, like, you know, triggers my mind and thought process. But I was listening to a podcast that Grant Cardone was a guest on. And
that dude's incredible.
Insane. He's insane. And, you know, he was talking about how his father died when he was young. He was like 13. And he was talking about how the biggest mistake that generation did and the current generations think they have to do is buy a home for their family.
Right.
And he talks about, you know, how his dad had passed away and all of his money was in this house that they couldn't no longer afford because he wasn't making income. And he's like, and he left us with nothing.
Right.
And which was why he got into real estate. So when he passes away, he has residual income that's constantly flowing into his family.
Yep.
He was like talking about how his first investment was like $5,000 or something. And he's like one of the biggest real estate people in the world. And he was, he also talked about how, you know, it's inevitable that the economy is going to crash.
Right.
And he's like, and when that crashes, people still need to live somewhere. So he buys like all economically friendly housing that he's like, they're going to have to live somewhere. They're going to have to rent it. He's like, my business isn't going anywhere.
Exactly.
And so after that, I remember coming home and being like,
let's go.
Let's look up a multifamily house. Like what?
Right.
And he also talked about how dumb people are to save money. He was like, if you don't have enough money to invest in real estate, invest in yourself until you have enough money to invest into real estate.
Right.
He's like, don't let money sit there. He's like, you know, invest into something that's going to make you money.
Right.
But and that was a long rant too. But real estate like gets me really excited because
so for anyone listening, he has a phenomenal book called The 10X Rule. And if you haven't read it yet,
I haven't. I bought like a smaller version of it. I have it actually, but like I haven't read it.
Rule?
No, I follow him and he was doing some promo like basically like a Spark Notes of it. He would send you for free.
Oh, nice.
So
it's a great book. You know, it really changes your perspective of what you need to do to be successful. And it's had a huge impact in my personal life and in my business.
Does it lend itself to any career, or is it specific
any career?
to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he talks about like how to be successful in any industry, essentially. And a lot of what he teaches is like, so he made a lot of his money from sales training, which, if you're not aware, everything in life requires sales, right? When you're going to the grocery store, you're either selling or you're being sold, right? And so he has a bunch of different books that talk about that, which those skills are applicable in any line of work, you know. So
you have to sell yourself.
Exactly.
Not in like a prostitute way, but
yeah.
So now this is very different than most beginnings of our podcast. But the reason that we wanted to start with this, and because it kind of speaks to how successful you have become, and you're 29?
29.
29.
Yep.
And fairly young. I mean,
Barely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people in this room that are in their early 20s. So, I mean, in hindsight, what do you mean? What are you making fun of me for? Because he is young?
Yes. I think we're all 28, 29. I think we're very young. Yeah.
Well,
we're still in the first inning, you know. Well, maybe like second or third, but we're
So you're young.
Right.
You're very successful.
Thank you.
And you know, this wasn't always the path that you were going down.
Right.
This wasn't the life that you had been creating for yourself, and you know, you had a lot of things that you had to overcome. So I guess to jump into the beginning, if you want to kind of talk about your childhood and then and leading up to that.
For sure. So I was born in Salt Lake City, grew up in West Valley City, which is kind of like the armpit southwest of Salt Lake City. So kind of a rougher part of town. It wasn't bad, you know, but there were like, my group of friends made the neighborhood kind of bad, you know, like we just did stupid crap all the time and got into a bunch of stuff we shouldn't have. So, you know, when I was in high school, you know, it's kind of a critical moment in every young adult's life. My parents got divorced. I had just broken up with a girlfriend who I, you know, thought was the one. Yeah, you know, like that's that naivete, you know. So that happened, and it was kind of a moment where my best friend at the time had been smoking weed, but keeping it from me because I was always really against it. So after that, you know, that kind of turmoil, I was really hurting. And he's like, well, do you want to come try this? And I'm like, why not? Like, all the stuff that I thought was supposed to be happening in my life all of a sudden came crashing down. So I'm like, okay, well, I can break this truth that I had with myself. So I did, and I loved it, right? Like, I just felt like, man, this is so cool. I feel so good. And it really, like, it consumed me, you know, like I have an addictive personality. And so to get away from that hurt that I was feeling and that turmoil I was feeling, it was a easy escape, right? Because you go and you smoke a bowl, all of a sudden you feel great again, and you don't have to deal with the anguish that you're going through. So, you know, that's a really slippery slope because you never really face it. And so what happened, you know, I've always had kind of a business mind. You know, in high school, I went to all these business classes and accounting and, you know, did really well. And I realized pretty quick after starting to smoke weed, I'm like, I need money to do this. It's not free, right? So I'm like, okay, well, if I buy a quarter of an ounce and I sell, I don't know, it's been so long. What would that be?
There's 26 grams in it.
Yeah, so if I sell 4 half-eighths or whatever, yeah.
Just kidding.
So if I sell 4 half-eighths, I'll get to smoke for free or whatever, like whatever the math was. So, you know, I realized that. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to sell enough so that I can smoke for free because, you know, I'm a broke young high school kid. I don't have money.
It's fascinating that that's the way, even then, how your mind worked with that.
Always, yeah. So, yeah, and it was a bad thing, right? So at the time, it was a terrible thing. So, you know, and I was just so stupid. Like, when I look back at some of the stuff I did, I'm like, wow, how are you not, like, in prison? Because, like, I would bring weed to school, and my goal would be to make $100 before lunch. Because I'd be selling bags in class.
That's incredibly ambitious.
It's stupid though. Yeah.
It's
like
so dumb, but like it's like
but like you kind of have to commend him for having
I mean, how old were you?
Know?
What, 16,
15, 16? Yeah.
I mean, what were you thinking about at 15? Cuz I wasn't thinking about, you know, monetizing.
Well, the reason I wanted money was so that I could buy Taco Bell. Like, it was just the reasoning was it didn't make sense, right? And so, you know, I was connecting with a lot of different people because you connect with dealers, you connect with buyers, you know, you connect with their older brothers, you connect with their connects, you know, and like I started like working my way up because I was selling all this stuff. And one of the people that I was selling to was like, hey, have you ever tried shrooms? And, you know, then it was, have you ever tried ecstasy? Oh, have you ever tried this? Have you ever tried that? So, you know, me and my group of friends started introducing all of these other things, and it was still that escape, right? So I was still running away from these issues that I had with self-worth, with, you know, whatever. Like, you just deal with these things that you're not aware of.
But at this point, it's becoming more and more dangerous.
It's becoming a lot more dangerous, right? So, you know, and keep in mind, I have 3 younger brothers, right? And I'm living with my mom at this point. So my brother under me, the next oldest, he would sneak into my room and steal stuff. Right? So he would steal weed, he would steal shrooms. And like, I caught him shroomed out of his mind when he was like 14 or 13, like terrible. And I didn't handle the situation well at all because I was pissed that he took it. So I like tortured the poor kid, you know, like it was awful. It had to have been the most traumatic experience of his life, you know, like just terrible. And so like, you know, I look back at some of these things, I'm like, man, I wish I could go back to that moment and like handle it different. But you can't, you know, and so it also helps further that addiction, right? So I just kept going down this pathway. And I had always really liked rollerblading. So I didn't mention this anytime before, but I used to love rollerblading. So I'd like grind down the handrails and, you know, I was an aggressive rollerblader or whatever. So I thought I was hot shit. So you get hurt when you do that. So
you're the first person that has cursed and hasn't automatically asked, "Can we curse on this podcast?"
Oh, really?
You can, but
okay.
like, but
he said crap earlier, and I was like, "Oh, he's like PGing this whole experience."
Well,
That's great.
Every single person, the first curse word that
I'm
comes
getting more
out,
comfortable.
Good. Good. Yes, please.
It was funny. But keep going. You're rollerblading.
So I had broken my arms.
You can have a sip.
Yeah, sorry. I'm talking so much. So I had broken my arms multiple times. So I was familiar with painkillers from a pretty young age. And at the time, it was never the connection wasn't there. It wasn't, I had a pain, I took this and it made it feel better. So then as I was continuing down my destructive path, someone said, "Oh, do you want to buy some Percocets?" And I knew the name from when I had broken my arms. So I'm like, okay, sure, like whatever. So I bought some and tried them, and I thought, I feel freaking awesome, right? Because the way that it acts on your brain, it just releases instant dopamine and you just feel fantastic, right? So that's why we have an opioid crisis, is because it's very effective at making you feel pleasure. So that really started me down a scary path for a lot of different reasons. And one of them was, at the time I had a job, I was still selling drugs, and I started.
Was that your job, or?
No, so I worked at I worked at a roller skating rink, making $5.15 an hour, and I thought, man, this is the life. Yeah, I get to do what I love. I was a DJ too. The guys
while you were blading.
Well, no, partially. So I would.
Didn't you ever go to
like
rollerblading rinks when you were younger?
Yeah, a couple times.
Yeah, they have DJs up in the corner.
Yeah,
okay.
So like when it wasn't like the main DJ, I would be the guy that was playing the stuff, and we'd like rent skates and stuff. So that was my job. So while doing that, I was getting further into this career of drug use, right? And it was...
and how old are you at this point?
Probably 16. So I was probably 16 and a half, roughly, when I got introduced to OxyContin. So the people who had introduced me to the Percocet say, oh, I have something that's a little more powerful. It'll make you feel great. And the only reason I tried it was because when I went to go buy, I don't know, like at the time I was buying like a half of a pound in like a week. And the guy's like, "Hey man, try this." So, you sniff it. And I did. And I felt incredible. And I actually threw up because I like did too much, but I still felt really good. And so I was like, okay, like I like the way that this makes me feel, because it really quiets those demons, that are in your mind. So that's when things really got bad, because, the cost of an OxyContin was like $1 per milligram, which is an 80 milligram pill is $80 for one pill, right? And like that could last you a day. So, I had money, but I spent it all, and you spend it all really quick. Like $80 a day adds up really fast. So then you start changing some of the things that you do. So like I would get drugs from people, and instead of paying them back or buying more drugs, I would use that money to buy OxyContin. So, you all of a sudden spend your source of income, and then you're like, well, shit, I still want to use drugs. And so what I would do is I would say, hey man, if you front me a quarter pound, which is like $1,000, I'll pay you back. I'm having a rough time right now. If you front it to me, I'll pay you. So then I would get the weed, I would sell it, but then I would use all the money for drugs. So you do that enough times and you piss off drug dealers.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not very happy with you, right? So at one point, a few guys broke into my house, and I was home by myself, and I got jumped in my bedroom in my underwear, which was really embarrassing. It wasn't like really bad, but like it sent a clear sign that like, okay, I'm headed down a path that's really terrible. But as an addict, it doesn't really, your brain doesn't operate that way, because all you're thinking about is that next fix, right? And I want to take a minute to talk about that, because as someone who's experienced that, I understand that drugs start to not become a choice, because the way that your brain works is it releases dopamine every time that you use opioids, and alcohol too, actually, for people who are listening. So it releases this dopamine, and the dopamine is the same signal that your brain sends when you have sex, when you eat food, and when you find shelter, right? So those are three instinctual needs that we have as humans, and that's the same release that an opioid gives you. So that's why people who are drug addicts will be homeless. That's why they won't eat, because their primary focus is getting this dopamine release. So, so I explain that to people because it really becomes the dominating factor in your life. So back to the story, I had just gotten beat up, and I was in this terrible spot, and I went and hung out with one of my friends who I had used OxyContin with in the past. He's like, hey, I have something else. Let's give it a try. So he pulls out black tar heroin, and that was the first time that I shot up. And the cost of black tar heroin was like a quarter of the price for OxyContin. So economically, it's the better option, but at the same time, it makes you do terrible things because all you need is $10 or $20 or whatever. So then you start like pawning off your parents' things because all you need is $10, right? So like you just start doing terrible things. Selling my little brother's Nintendo DS that he got for Christmas, you know, like just really awful, terrible things that like traumatizes me when I think about, because it's like I was the worst brother. And now when my brothers struggle, I'm like, if I had been better, would they be better? You know? So it's like,
how old were you at this point when it
I was still
transitioned into heroin?
I was probably 18. I mean, I was still really young. Like this all happened really fast. Like I graduated from Percocets to Oxy to heroin probably within 18 months to 2 years.
Wow.
So it was all really, really fast. So, sorry, I'm like going way into stuff. Like
No, please.
Keep going.
No, really.
Please.
I just don't know how much time we have.
No,
we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll make it longer if we have
Okay.
to.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're in
This is
control.
important. This
Okay.
is
Okay.
important. Yeah.
So yeah, it all happened really fast, and I was fully engulfed in it. And that friend who introduced me to heroin, he actually was robbing houses to fund his addiction, right? So like, I'd go to his house and he'd have like a new TV every other day, because he would just break into people's houses. So then, like, I don't know, probably a month or two later, I hear that he got arrested. And his story is all over the news because they connected all the houses that got robbed with
Back to
him. So he got charged with like 40 robberies, went to prison. So I'm like, well, that's not a good thing to do. Probably don't do that, right? And my primary concern was if I go to jail, I can't use drugs anymore, right? That was my mentality. Like nothing can interfere.
Not even about your life, just
yeah,
being
I
able
didn't
to
care
use
about
again.
that, right? So, and throughout my life, I had been involved in court, you know, and like one time when I was in high school, I tried to steal a scale from the science lab because I'm like, oh, this is a really nice scale. Like I could pawn it and make some money. But then I got caught. So I went to like a juvenile detention center for like a week or whatever. So like I had been involved with law enforcement, and
You were familiar with it. Yeah.
yeah. So
What was like the economic area that you lived in?
West Valley City.
What like was it, you know, below?
It was probably mid. I don't want to say middle class, but like middle to low middle class, you know? So like I wasn't in like the straight up ghetto, but like my neighborhood wasn't super nice by any means. You know, I think the area that I grew up is going downhill even further. But I also think there's areas that are being gentrified. So, you know, it's kind of it's natural for a neighborhood to go through those ebbs and flows.
Absolutely.
So my friend gets arrested, and he has another friend that I had met while going to his house after he had broken in. And this guy's name was Nick. So I hang out with Nick, and, you know, he's got a car, which in the drug community, having a car is like, you know, awesome, because then you can actually go to get drugs, because I didn't have a car because I sold it for drugs. Yeah. So like I had nothing. Right. So anyways, starting to hang out with Nick. We're becoming friends. We're hanging out. Like I see him almost every day because he's like a using buddy. So this is probably 2010, beginning of 2010. So we're hanging out every day. And one day he had like a girlfriend that was living with my mom who was paying rent. Right. It was a really weird like arrangement.
Yeah.
But I got drugs out of it. So like that was my, you know, like it was all around about drugs. Like it's terrible to say, and I feel bad about it, but like literally that was my life, was like, where am I going to get my next fix? How am I going to use it? How do I get the one after that?
You know, it's funny because you hear that being said when you hear about these stories, but
Right.
hearing it from somebody firsthand, it just makes it real.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not that I didn't believe anybody else, but
I just didn't care about anything else. Like showering didn't matter. Girls didn't matter. Nothing.
Right.
Like I just had one focus.
right, one track mind, right?
Right. So, the girl who's living with me, we're like, oh, let's go to Arctic Circle, right? So we hop in my mom's car, we're driving to Arctic Circle, and all of a sudden the girl just starts like crying, like uncontrollably crying. Well, it turns out Nick had died in a parking lot the night before. And at the time we had introduced Xanax into our drug using escapades, right? So Xanax and heroin is a lethal combination because just the way that it acts on your body, it suppresses your central nervous system to where you're not breathing, and a lot of times people have heart failure and die. So what happened was he was in the parking lot of his dad's apartment complex, and his dad wouldn't let him in. So he's like, okay, I have to sleep in my car. And this was like January 30th in Utah, so it's freezing. So apparently either on the way to his car or from his car, he like fell down because he was so high. And he ended up dying of hypothermia, which is what I was told. I obviously don't know the full details, but that was what I was told. So he died as a result of using drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the first wake up call, you know, like my friend going to prison. Yeah, that sucks, you know, oh well. But then him dying was like, oh my God, like this is real. So at the time I would have considered him probably a best friend, but looking back, I'm like, that was a terrible relationship. Like there was no loyalty, friendship. Like it was just,
you can't discern that when you're high.
It was purpose driven. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he dies, and, you know, obviously my family knows because he had come over, and he was a very nice guy. Like we did have moments where he was a good friend, but that was very rare. And after that, my parents kind of got involved and said, look, you know, we know that you're doing this. And I was back and forth between my parents' houses. You know, I would manipulate one to the very edge, and they'd be like, get the hell out of my house, blah, 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 you know, like you need to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So then I would go to the other parent's house and I would do the same thing, and I would manipulate. And then they'd say, get the hell out of my house. And then I would go to the next place, and it was just back and forth. And sometimes they'd both be so pissed that I wouldn't have a place to stay. Right. So that sucked.
Can I ask you something about that?
Yeah.
Were you like, at the time, were you consciously manipulating them? What I mean is, like, did you feel any sort of remorse, or were you so hyper-focused on your goal that nothing...
I didn't feel remorse, and I probably didn't feel remorse until after I started getting clean.
Okay.
You know, so like after that, after my friend died, I started looking for programs because my parents said, you know, this isn't working out. You're going to die. You're going to end up in prison, or you're just going to keep doing this, and we can't have that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we need to help you out. So I'm like, okay, cool. So they had found a couple programs, and they said, but we need you to call them and like talk to them because this is your recovery, whatever. So I'm like, okay. So, anyone who uses drugs knows about Suboxone. So Suboxone is something that people take that, I think it's naloxone, which is it makes it to where you can't use opiates, right? So it blocks that mechanism of action in the brain. And you have to be clean for like 24 hours before you can start it, right? So you have to go through hell for a little bit, and then you can start it. I think you might actually have to be off it for like 48 hours.
I think. Yeah.
So anyway, otherwise it makes you like severely withdrawal. So, and I've done that mistakenly, which is awful.
Mm-hmm.
So, my one condition to going to this program was, will you give me Suboxone? They said, yeah, we'll give you Suboxone. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, well, how much is it? They're like, well, it's $20,000 for 45 days. I'm like, I'm basically homeless. Like, I don't have that money.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, what about your parents? And I'm like, I don't think they have that kind of money. Like, we're not like wealthy by any means. So they're like, okay, well, can we talk to your parents? I'm like, sure. So they talked to my dad for a little while. Oh, before that, they said, how much can you afford? How much do you think you can afford? I said, oh, I can maybe afford $2,000. I had no clue how I was going to get $2,000. So they're like, all right, well, can we talk to your parents? And I was at my dad's, so they talked to my dad. So they talked to him, and then they put me back on the phone, and they say, all right, if you come today, we'll let you come for $1,000 for the 45 days. So it turns out that I had called at the best time because it was like February 3rd, and they only had 2 people in the program. So they were like itching for money. So it just worked out.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's crazy.
Divine intervention,
Right.
100%. Like, any other time, it was like, literally, while I was there, we got to capacity. So, like, it just so happened that I called the day that they're like, we need to pay the bills, whatever. So I go to this program, and it was like vacation. It was incredible, right? So this place, like, was this lodge, like in southern Utah, beautiful. And, they let you smoke cigarettes. They let you drink all the coffee you wanted. You had to go to these meetings, and they were just bogus, like, I knew exactly what they wanted to hear. They got me off of the Suboxone within 8 days, which wasn't part of our agreement. So I was pretty heated about that, but, thankful for it afterwards, because they did a taper. So I got off the Suboxone, and I was clean. I was working the steps, like whatever. And so I graduate that program, and, I felt really bad for all the stuff that I had done because I was an asshole, right? And I was manipulating everyone around me. So part of working the 12-step program is like making amends and doing all that. So, I tried doing it, and I was valiant in my effort on the front side. But then after about 45 days after graduation, I had been living with my grandparents, and, the boredom of life, I guess, kind of started to set in, and those demons started calling again. So, what I like to tell people about recovery is it's so much more intensive than 30 days or 90 days or whatever. Like, it takes years, and you really have to figure out why you're using, right? Because addiction is really a symptom of something underlying. Okay. So, like, if someone had been raped as a child and never dealt with it, that would, it could be something they don't remember, but it could cause them to use drugs to deal with that pain that they feel, or that inadequacy, or whatever it might be. So that was my way of dealing with, what I think it was is inadequacy. And I think I didn't have a purpose, right? I think that's a really big thing, especially in our generation, where people don't feel like they have this goal or this target or this thing that they need to do. So they go to what makes them feel good, easy, right? So I didn't have that, right? I didn't know what I was doing. I was working at like Kohl's, and then I was working at a deli, and I was just like miserable, you know? And so I started using again, and I was living with my grandparents. So
what, if you don't mind me asking, what was it that you started using?
Heroin
did you
again.
go right back
Went
to
right back to it. I didn't even, it was like I hadn't skipped a beat, right? So it was pretty quick, and it was worse, like, because I had more money now, and like I had been working for a few months or like a month and a half, and had money saved up and whatever. Excuse me. So I'm trying to keep this cohesive, and like understandable.
Doing a very good job so far.
So I started using again, and I fell really fast. And I started using, and I was living probably about 20 minutes away from where I grew up, which, was a good idea on my family's part to get me out of West Valley City, but it wasn't far enough, right? So like I knew exactly where to go still. I knew which street I could get drugs on. So I fell right back into it, and my grandparents had like found paraphernalia, like needles or whatever. They said, look, we know that you're doing this again. We want to help you out. Through like my family network, we had heard of this program that was based in Canada. And it was a 24-month inpatient program. You live there, you work there, you're committed for 24 months minimum. Some people could be there for 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was really depressed, right? Because my parents had confronted me, my grandparents had confronted me, and they said, look, you know, enough is enough. We know that you're doing this. If you don't find a program, you're out. Like, we're kicking you out. Don't call us. Don't call us until you're ready to get clean. Mm-hmm. So they kind of gave me that ultimatum, which I needed. So I started doing my own research, and, you know, the program, they didn't say this is the program you're going to. They said, look at this, see if it's something you want. If you find something better, let's do that. So I did a bunch of research, and through my research, I've stumbled upon this Eric Thomas, the motivational speaker, mm-hmm. the hip hop preacher, or whatever he calls himself. And basically the gist of the story he tells, and if you look it up, it's like the greatest motivational speech of all time, something like that. He's like in a classroom talking to kids. And he talks about, there's this guy who wants to be successful, and he meets this mentor, or finds this guy who's like financially wealthy, who's like set. He says, how do I be like you? And he says, meet me tomorrow at 4 a.m. at the beach. The guy's like, the beach? Like, I want to be successful. Why am I going to meet you at the beach? Mm-hmm. So he's like, whatever, I'll meet him at the beach. So he shows up to the beach, suit and tie, you know, like ready to go and slay some business stuff. And he's like looking around and can't see this guy. The guy's like, hey, I'm out here in the water. So this guy's out in the water. So he's like, come on out here. I'll teach you how to be successful, right? So he gets him out. He's up to his waist. Come out closer, you know, farther. Come on out. So he goes up, the water's to his neck, you know, and he's like, what are we doing out here, man? Like, he's like, I'm going to teach you how to be successful. So he dunks the guy under the water and holds him there. And this guy's fighting and scratching and kicking. And he's trying everything, because when you're under the water and you want to breathe, right? He says, that's the only thing you care about. You don't care what's on TV. You don't care what your mom made for dinner. You don't care what your brother said to you last week. All you want to do is breathe. And he said, when you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, then you'll be successful.
I have chills. I have literal chills.
And that just like...
I mean, it's cold in here, but you know, that was...
It spoke to me on like a spiritual level. Yeah. Where I'm like, I know I can be successful, but I have to get clean. Like, I cannot keep doing this and stay alive, mm-hmm. right? So I knew that. So then I'm like, 2 years, that sucks. I don't want to do that, but I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. So basically I like started calling up the program, and there was a guy, Nick, there, and he's like my brother for life. He was the program director at the time, also a recovering addict. So the program basically is an each one teach one philosophy. So people who are in the program run the program. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's like, you know, someone who's telling you how to recover and live your life has gone through the same shit that you're going through right now. Right. Yeah. So it's like you listen to them, because that was part of my issue with the last place, was like, you don't know what this is like. Like, I'm dope sick. This is awful. Mm-hmm. So anyways, I talked to Nick, and he's like, no, I don't think you're committed, and hung up on me. And I'm like, what? Like, are you for reals? You know, like, I'm ready to go. So then,
what about that conversation did he
fired me up?
That it was, did you later find out why he was like, no, I'm apprehensive?
I was just mopey, you know, like I was mopey and I was uncommitted, and he just saw right through my bullshit, because he was an addict too. Right. Yeah. So he knew exactly, like, he's like, oh, you're just doing this for your parents, and hung up. And I'm like, no, I'm not, you know, like, I swear. So anyways, I convinced him to allow me to come to the program, which at the time, I was the first American to ever go to the Canadian location. And it's because my grandma knew the son-in-law who started the program. Weird connection. Mm. So that was kind of my in. And at the time, the program was free, right? It was free for 24 months. So
Canada.
no, it's not because of that.
Really?
So yeah, so what it is at a therapeutic community, which is what it's called, people who are there work in like a business that's owned by the therapeutic community. So in Canada, they had what's called Price Pro, which is like a Costco type store where they have a deli, they have a furniture department, they have, you know, all this other stuff. It's like this business that you run, and while you're in the program, you work in the business. So it's really a brilliant concept because as a young drug addict, you don't have those life skills. I didn't know how to be a good employee. I didn't know how to be a leader. I didn't know how to confront issues that are bothering me. So all of these things were perfectly tailored for what I needed. And so the reason that they're able to offer the program for so little money, and it's changed since that time, like because there's medical expenses that they started realizing that drug addicts have. Like a lot of people don't have teeth who have been in addiction for a long time, right? So, you know, I think the entrance fee is like $6,000 for 2 years, which is incredible still.
Sure.
I mean, it's unheard of.
I mean, 20,000 for 45 days.
Correct.
Think about that.
Right.
Difference,
So that's a prime example. So my entrance fee into the program was like $387, like nominal fee. So I go in, and the day before I go in, I use a bunch of drugs. So I don't really remember the trip, but like I flew to Seattle, and then from Seattle, the CEO of the Seattle location drove me to like Bellevue or Bellingham, I think. So then the CEO of the whole organization picks me up at one of his furniture stores in, I think it's Bellevue, picks me up in Bellevue, and we drive across the border together. And he's like, just tell him we're family and that you're visiting. It was amazing. Like, so, you know, because you can only visit for like 6 months at a time or whatever. So I had to file for visitor status and stuff, but it was just like a fun little story that, you know, he was so committed to helping people change their life that he was willing to come and pick me up. Yeah. Right. So it was just like, you know, he's the best dude I've ever met by far. That's and awesome. I'll talk more about him in a little bit, but, yeah, so I get to the program and, I was sick, no joke, because at the time I was smoking like a pack of cigarettes a day. So they don't let you smoke there. So I quit heroin cold turkey and smoking cigarettes cold turkey overnight.
It's a lot on the body. It's a lot of withdrawal.
It was awful.
Yeah. No,
awful.
For sure, yeah.
So literally I didn't sleep for the first week because if you think about it, like heroin is such a strong downer that it really puts this tax on your body to where, you know, when I came off of it, I no longer had that, right? So you have to keep in mind it's this immensely powerful painkiller. I was feeling pain just from like sitting because my body wasn't used to not having this drug coursing through my body. So like, I kid you not, like at night, my joints would just ache and I would feel this terrible pain. And I didn't sleep. But the cool thing about the program is they're like, get up, time to go. We got to go to work, you know? And like you get up and like when you first start in the program, they have you like cleaning toilets and stuff. So you're just like humbled from the beginning, right? Yeah. It's awful.
So you have like this like almost like militaristic schedule there that you're abiding by?
So you have to wake up at 6:30. You have to be like at breakfast by 7:30. Before that, you have to like do a chore, right? So like it is somewhat militaristic in the sense of like it's very structured, it's very regimented, which as a drug addict, you've never lived like that, right? Like you do what you want when you want to do it. Excuse me. So I was not used to this at all, right? But as I started to, you know, kind of clear the fog in my mind, I realized like this is really good. Like I need this. And I was committed from the beginning, but as an addict, you still always have that voice in your mind. And probably for the first year that I was in the program, I still had thoughts like, man, I could just go out and use right now. I could go and like hitchhike down back to Utah. I could be home. I could be done, you know, like, and that feeling to quit was still there. But then after the first year, I just felt like, man, I've been doing this for a year. Like, holy shit. I can do this.
Yeah.
Right. And like one of the cool things that they teach you in the program is that, I can't remember the line. I'd have to look it up, but it's, the power to succeed lies within me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like we would literally have like chants. So like in the morning you would say it, and there's this whole thing. I don't know it off the top of my head anymore because it's been so long, but you would say it in the morning, in the afternoon, and at night before dinner. Right. And we'd all say it together as, brothers, because there wasn't females in the program at the time. So we would all say it, and it's just super powerful. And people who would be there would be like crying because it's just this awesome thing. And like you start to internalize that. Right. And the things that we would say in there are like, I'm going to watch out for my brothers. The power to succeed lies within me. Success is my obligation, so you take this hardcore accountability for your life, which I feel like has been crucial in my success, because once you realize that you're accountable for yourself, and if you're unhappy with your life or anything in your life, it's your fault. Right? If you're not happy with your business, at the end of the day, it's your fault. If you're not happy with your relationship, at the end of the day, it's your fault, right? What can you do to make your life better, right? And once you have that mentality, everything changes. Because if there's something you're unhappy with, you know that it's up to you.
Right.
So get to changing it, right? So, that's kind of the recovery story. And while in the program, I kind of worked up the ranks. They had leadership roles within the organization. So you'd become a family leader, right? So you'd be in charge of your little house of guys, and you'd be in charge of making sure the chores get done. And if something didn't get done, it was your fault, right? So like it just reinforces that accountability. And then they had like a student council presidency. So through the program, it really teaches you organizational skills. It teaches you how to lead people and lead by example. So, if you wanted to motivate someone to clean a bathroom, you'd be like, come here, let me show you how to do this. I'm going to do it with you. Right. Like it teaches you how to be a good leader. So through that, I was able to move up to the student council president role, and then from there to the acting program director, because Nick had moved on. So now I was in charge of the program there in Canada, and learning a lot about leadership. And through that role, I got to spend a lot of time with John Vulcan. So John Vulcan was the founder of the program, and extremely humble man who became immensely wealthy from United Furniture Warehouse. So he's a German immigrant who immigrated to Canada when he was like 14. Rags to riches story. Was cleaning dishes just so that he could eat, and was cleaning pig stalls so that he would make like 15 cents an hour. Like just crazy story. Entrepreneur of the year. He won in like 1995 or something. So like really super successful dude. He grew his business to like 120 million annual in sales. So like just dominated the furniture market, ended up selling the business. He put $100 million into the John Vulcan Foundation, which is his charity that operates. He has Lift the Children in Africa, which operated at the time like 90 orphanages. So
Wow.
he would pay to,
Wow.
really cool what this guy's
That's awesome.
done. So he operates the orphanages, and then he also has this program. So donated all of his money to be able to help people out. And he always talks about, I never felt like this money was mine. Like God made me wealthy because he knew that I would do good with it. And unless you're going to do good with it, you're not going to get it. Right. So it was really, money and being able to give was always like kind of connected in my mind. Like, if you really want to be successful, you need to be willing to give away what you have. So
do you give credit to, the program and what you went through to your success? Well, not your success is because of you, but the foundation that you learned
Absolutely.
Of structure.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I'm still very disciplined, right? Like I've always been, before the program I was not disciplined, but since graduating I've been very disciplined in a lot of things, and I've realized that the things that work, you need to duplicate that, right? So like one thing that I do every single night before a work day
You write a list, right?
I write a list.
Why did I know that?
I probably posted it on Instagram or something.
Yeah.
But I go a little further than that. So I write out my goals every single night, and then I plan my day based on how am I going to achieve my goals, right? So you guys have some goals up on the board. Every single day I'm thinking about how am I going to achieve my goal, right? And it's very important to do that, because when you're constantly thinking about it and you're visualizing what your life looks like when you've achieved that goal, the likelihood of it happening is like tenfold, right? Because you're constantly thinking about it. You're constantly thinking how you're going to do it. Because when you're committed to a goal, we both know that it happens, right? So, you know, there is a lot of things that discipline and structure really influenced my life in a very positive way.
What year did you come out of the program?
So I graduated in 2012, November 21st, 2012, I believe. I'd have to double check the date, but I'm pretty sure that was it.
So 7 years clean. Is that right?
Actually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
No, it's more than that. I don't remember when no, it was 2010 that I graduated. No. Honestly, I don't recall. I mean,
yeah.
I know that the day I went to the program was October 15th. Yeah, so it was October 15th, 2010. That makes sense, because I was clean October 10th or October 15th, 2010. So October 15th, 2020 is going to be 10 years sober.
That's
right?
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. So, you know, it's been a wild ride, and it's been fun. There's been ups, there's been downs. And, you know, sometimes people ask me, like, if you could go back and change any of it, would you? And I don't think I would, because I don't think that I would be the person that I am today had I not experienced all of those things, right?
So we, like towards the end of the episode, we like to ask questions that we
Sure.
posted. I have some in my head that I remembered because they're on mine.
Sure.
The one, it just reminded me of something you said. And the one person asked, besides anything to do with drug use, what is one regret that you have? Throwing questions at you now.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Probably like pawning my brother's Nintendo DS. You know, that's like that was his ultimate gift. And I just sold it for a cheap fix, you know? So like, it's an awful feeling.
I think I'll probably answer my own question, but, you know, you talked about things that we talk about root causes, actually a lot recently. We've talked about everything having a root cause, and sometimes we as humans have been through something that we've hidden so far down that we don't realize it, but it's still the root cause to a lot of issues that we have in the future. And you talked about that. You talked about having these root causes to why you did that. Was it in the program that you finally dealt with those feelings?
Yeah. So part of the program that we really worked on was we would have encounter sessions. So encounter sessions were all different, but essentially if you saw someone doing something that either wasn't allowed or was a addictive type behavior, right? So if someone like stole something or whatever, right? You were required as your like brotherly duty to pull them up, right? And a pull-up would be like, Becky, check yourself. And you would say, thank you. And I would tell you what you did, and I would state your behavior that needed to be corrected. And you were required to correct that behavior immediately. So if you had a piece of gum in your pocket that you had just stolen, you had to go and put it back. And then when we would go to these encounter sessions, we would address those behaviors that we that we had seen or had done during the week. So through that process, you would have this really a lot of self-reflection, right? And I think the biggest thing for me was I had a feeling of inadequacy for a lot of my life, and I don't know that was, but you know, I think I dealt with that in the sense of like, I know that I can be successful and I can do the things that I want to achieve. And it kind of helped me achieve that through just my persistence, right? Like I learned that, you know, it's up to me to do what I need to do to win.
To get through it, yeah.
Right. So from Canada, right as I was graduating, we had a lot of people coming from Arizona. And they asked me if I would want to open a location in Phoenix. So they had purchased property. It was like a horse farm. And they're like, do you want to go and be the founding brother of this program? And I'm like, hell yes. You know, so I went down and we transplanted 3 students from the Seattle program down there with me to be brothers, right? Like actual members of the program. So they were still in the program. They hadn't graduated yet. So that's how we kind of started with a transplant of a few guys, and we had some people come in probably a month after I started it. So it's pretty cool. And then transitioning back into normal life, you know, I had grown up as a member of the LDS church, and you know, I think it was a really smart move for me to continue to be a member of the church because they don't believe in drinking. They don't believe in drugs, you know, like, so those values really aligned with my sobriety, you know, so that was a great move, and that's where I met my wife. And from being in the program, you know, I had met someone who was working for that property management company, so that's how I transitioned from there, and that was after I got engaged. So best choice ever.
She's sitting in the corner.
Yes.
Yeah. Looking great.
Along with a
Looking
full
great, might I
studio
add.
audience
Oh,
that
yeah.
we now have. We need a camera back here to
right.
cut to that.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious.
I have a question inside of that answer.
Okay.
Sure.
Was there any struggle, you know, with going back into real life this time? Because I know last time that there was, after the first time you went to rehab.
So not really, because I, as the program director in Arizona, I had a lot of responsibility, and I lived in the house with the guys. So it was almost like the perfect transition, because I was in a new area that I didn't know. I was still living all of the values of the program, right? Waking up early, working, eating good, you know, like working out, doing all this stuff. So really it was an easy transition because I'm still living the values of the program. I'm there every night. I'm there every day working with the guys. So it was pretty easy making that transition, you know, because, you know, the program really teaches you how to live life, right? You work every single day. You are busy. You know, the founder of the program always says, you need to be so busy that when you're sleeping, you're busy sleeping, right? So like, that's the mantra, you know, like we only have so many hours in a day to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And we need to structure our time wisely, because eventually we run out. So use the time that you have wisely, you know, so
I like that.
yeah.
Very good.
Next question.
So, let me just pull it up. So I'm going to ask this as a twofold question. It actually came from 2 different Instagram followers of ours. But so one starts off by saying, you're so strong and we're all proud of you, which I thought was worth mentioning, or so did Becky.
Thank you.
And the question would be, what was the point when you knew you beat it? And the second part of that is how do you fight past the urges today, if there are any urges today?
I don't think I've beaten it.
Okay.
Right. And I don't think any recovering addict will say that they have, because the minute that you say you've won and you're not an addict, that's when you begin your next addiction. Right. So like, I never will say like, I am recovered, right? Because I don't think that's a place that you can be. Everyone as humans has addictive tendencies. Some are just stronger than others. So yeah, I mean, like I love caffeine, but it's like, I'm not going to go and sell my shit to go and buy caffeine, you know, like it's just different, you know, like, so, I don't think that I've won, but I think that I've changed my life, right? Like, I think that's a fair thing to say. Like, I knew when I no longer craved drugs first thing in the morning that I was changing my life. And I think that's what has to happen. You can't continue to live in a house full of people using drugs and get clean. It doesn't work, right? Because you have one bad day and all of a sudden you're going to go right back to it. Mm-hmm. So I think, when you're in an environment and you want to be in an environment where people are making healthy choices, that's when you're on the right path and you're going to be all right. But I don't really have urges. It's not really something that I struggle with because I'm just so focused on my goals and my purpose and my vision that I know what it's like to be dope sick, right? Like, I will never go through that again because it is awful, right? I mean, it's the absolute worst. And I know that, one's too many and 1,000's never enough, right? I'm an addict. Like, if I go down that path, I know where it goes. I've been there. I don't want to do that again. It's asinine for me to do that. I think that's a better word.
Great word.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. That was the.
Well, yeah.
So, we are definitely coming to our limit. It's gone well over an hour now.
Okay.
What we like to do to end, because like our second end is asking questions. Our last end is asking our guests to give a last word of advice.
Okay.
Actually, before that, I do have one more question.
Okay.
Because I remember someone put, what is your advice to a family or friend to be able to help an addict?
So that's a great question. And as someone who was the program director of a program, that was my job, was talking to the parents and figuring out how to help people. And I actually have a rough draft of a book on just that, how to help the family member help their son, daughter, whoever, figure out that they need treatment. And I think the way that you do that is, it sounds weird to say it, but you eliminate every other option, right? So like, if I look back at my life and dozens of people's lives that I've helped get into treatment, there's kind of a process to it where the family needs to all band together and say, look, enough is enough. We're not going to allow you to keep making these choices with our involvement. Mm-hmm. Because I would tell a parent, why would they change? They have a warm bed, they have food every night, and you're probably going to drive them places they need to go. You are literally enabling their addiction, right? So you need to stop that. And whether that's drug testing or, whatever the case may be, like you have to put an end to that behavior because there's no reason that they would change. So eliminating their options to use drugs would include like telling them if they don't go to a treatment program or get clean, that they're no longer welcome in your house. And the only time that they can call you is if you're calling to go into a treatment program. Because I've talked to parents on both sides of this coin where they say, I stopped my child from using drugs by saying that we're done. You're either going to treatment or, you're out of here. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of that is you're enabling your child to use drugs in your home. What happens when they die? Which would you rather have? Mm-hmm. Would you rather have them pissed off at you or whatever because you kicked them out or you eliminated all of their other options? Or would you rather have them dead? That's an obvious answer, right? So the reality is with addiction, you might kick someone out and they still might die. That's the reality, and you have to face that. But would you rather have them die at your house or die in someone else's house, right? Because if they die in your house, you will feel guilty for the rest of your life. So let's figure out a plan to talk to that person and help them make the choice to choose recovery, right? Because that's essentially what you're doing by eliminating their other options. Because people will choose the the least discomfort. Okay, that's just human nature. So if their life sucks because of using drugs, and you can present something that's less painful than continuing to use drugs, they will choose recovery, right? I knew that a homeless drug addict has a really tough life, and I don't want to be a homeless drug addict. So I'd rather choose recovery and start changing my life. So that's a very long answer to your question, but eliminating their options, and I think communication is key, right? And give the John Vulcan Academy a call, because it's a fantastic program. I'm not paid to endorse them in any way. I'm just paying it forward because that program changed my life, and I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have the wonderful life that I have now, and I'm eternally grateful. So it's the least that I can do is, if you or someone you know is struggling, give them a call. They have people on staff who are ready and willing to talk to you. They're willing to talk to the family members and help get a plan. So, yeah.
That was good.
I think I want to mention something real quick before we close, because you've mentioned your wife throughout this, and she and I had a conversation before we started recording, and I think that this is important to touch on. She made it very clear that there's a distinction between a person and the addiction that they have, you know, like a person's true self, their core, and the behavior that they exhibit while they're addicted. And you are such a leading example of changing, you know, for the better, that I think for anybody with doubt that a person can do that, you're, you know, somebody that should be listened to.
Thank you.
And well, I mean, it's true, but I just
I was an awful person, and not the same person I am today in my addiction, because I didn't care about people at all. I just cared about using drugs, right? And so, you know, people who have that mindset they're crazy, because they'll do whatever it takes, you know, and it's a terrifying thing. But on the flip side, I will say that you could look at some of the traits. Hear me out, okay? This is kind of a stretch, okay? And it may be controversial. Some of those attitudes and behaviors that led me to be successful in addiction could also possibly lead me to be successful in my life now, because I have a burning desire to accomplish the things I want to accomplish, similar to how a drug addict feels that need to go and pursue.
I think that has a lot to do with the person you were before you started doing drugs.
Sure.
You always,
Absolutely.
you know, you always had the
business acumen,
that burning.
and now
but for you,
success.
it definitely, you know, I mean.
But I think, you know, if someone can be successful in an addiction, they can be successful in life, because that determination to use can be used as determination to be successful. It's all about that mind shift, right? And you have to change your mindset. Otherwise, you'll just keep spinning your wheels and doing the same thing. But I absolutely think that, you know, it's a choice, right? At the end of the day, people say, oh, it's a disease. Oh, it's this, it's that. People choose it, right? And I was choosing it, and I know that I was choosing it. And it wasn't until I realized that there were better options and that I could actually change my life that I got clean, because I chose to try and get clean. And it was my choice. It was always my choice. And going back to the last question, I think that's important, that people have to choose it. You can't force someone into recovery, because it's not going to be real. They're not going to dig deep enough. They're not going to uncover those causes of what makes them want to use, right? You have to eliminate that and figure out what it is. So now the final question.
So now the final words of advice. I know that was just a full wrap up of advice, but if there was any other points that, you know, or any other things that you could say that maybe someone needs to hear, now's your time.
Oh, that's tough. Well, I would say probably the pinnacle of advice that I would have is that, and I've stolen this, so I cannot coin it as my own, but if your mind can conceive it and believe it, you can achieve it. Okay, and that's true for everything in life. If you can believe it and you can conceive it, maybe I have those backwards, but if you believe that you can be successful and you visualize it, you can accomplish your goals. And I think that's applicable to anything, right? I mean, I look at Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and I look at all these people who have been massive, Grant Cardone, people who have been massively successful, and I think that is just a person, right? Like, we build them up to be these massive people. They are people just like you and I, right? They just have different skills. They have different traits that have allowed them to be successful. Can we learn that? Of course we can. So you could have that level of success if that's what you chose and if that's what you believed you could do, right? So that would be my thing, is you can achieve anything that you set your mind to if you're willing to do the work, right? If you're willing to go after it as badly as you want to breathe, you'll get it, right? Because nothing else can matter if that's what you really want. So that's my final advice.
That's your final advice.
Yeah.
I'm sure after people listen to this that there's definitely going to be questions about the what is it called?
Therapeutic community.
Yeah, the therapeutic community that you talked of. So we'll definitely get that information from you and you know, put it on our social media, and I'll link your Instagram and stuff if people might have real estate questions for you, because I know that you're pretty big in that community of helping and educating others to be able, because there's enough real estate for everyone.
Yeah, there is, for sure. And I will say that, you know, if people who do listen have needs for their recovery, you know, like I'm an ear to help, you know. I can't commit to a person that I'll do everything I can to help them, but I mean, I will do everything I can to help them, but you know, I'm not going to quit my day job to go into that. You know, like I will help people out if I can, you know. It's a part of my heart and my soul is helping people out, and there's a real joy that comes from helping someone out of a dark place like that.
You're preaching to the choir. So thank you so much for taking the time for coming.
Thanks for having me
over here.
Yeah. Of course.
Laura, do you have any final?
No, I think that was.
All right, awesome. So thank you guys for joining us for another week. If you're not doing so already, make sure to subscribe, like, comment, follow, all of the fun stuff.
Smash that subscribe.
Yeah, smash that subscribe button.
Can we say that from now on?
Yeah. That's what people say. That's why I said it.
I
you don't watch YouTube.
I don't belong.
She's not the social media person, is she?
I read the captions.
Yeah. All right, guys. Have a good night, day, whenever you're listening to this, and we'll see you guys next week.
For the haters, come on, do it now or later. It don't matter what your name is, share your story, we'll be waiting.